Evolutionary virus.
You lied to us.
If Fallout's wasteland is the outside danger, then Norm MacLean is the inside danger, because Norm isn't the guy who survives by shooting first. Norm survives by noticing the rules. And in episode 5, Norm does the one thing you are never supposed to do in a Vault-Tec story. He touches the truth, not rumors, not folklore. He touches the actual file, and the second he does, the show shuts him down like a faulty machine, because that final moment isn't just a cliffhanger, it's a warning. It's Fallout looking straight at us and saying, the biggest question we should be asking isn't whether Norm is dead. The question we should be asking is what Vault-Tec does to people who find out too much. So today we're going all in. We're breaking down what actually happens to Norm in episode 5. Why that F.E.V. reveal changes the entire season, and the 4 biggest possibilities for Norm's fate. Because one of them doesn't just end his story, it corrupts it. And by the end, we're going to pick the one theory the show is quietly pushing the hardest, even if it's the most terrifying option. Now, before we get to the theories, we need to talk about why Norm is the wrong character to leave alive. Because everyone in Fallout lies, everyone manipulates, everyone survives. But Norm is dangerous in a different way. Norm isn't trying to win a war, he's trying to solve a system. And Vault-Tec doesn't fear bullets. Vault-Tec fears pattern recognition. That's what Norm represents. He's the guy who sees the clean suburban smiles, the cheerful posters, the community, the family, the future. And he sees the screws behind the drywall. He sees how the machine is built. And if you're Vault-Tec, that kind of person can't be allowed to walk free. Because if Norm escapes, he doesn't just tell people what happened. He tells them how it happened. And that's worse. That's how movements start. That's how revolutions happen. That's how Vault-Tec dies. And episode 5 proves this with one brutal detail. Norm doesn't even get a heroic moment. He doesn't get a final speech. He doesn't get to hit the alarm. He gets exactly enough time to see one word, F.E.V., and then he gets erased. That is Fallout's way of showing us that this isn't about action. This is about information. And in Fallout, information is radioactive. So let's rewind the tape and walk through what we know for sure. Norm makes it to Vault-Tec's old ground, the place that still smells like corporate ambition even after the world ends. He's surrounded by people who treat the apocalypse like it's still a networking event, still investors, still company, still assets. And the scariest part? They're not doing it as a joke. They actually believe the old world never ended. They just believe the rules still apply. Because these aren't wasteland survivors. These are Vault survivors, the people trained to live inside a plan. Norm is moving through that space like a parasite in a machine, quiet and observant, not trying to fight anyone, just trying to find the wiring. And the show is making it painfully clear that Norm is doing something no one else is doing. Everyone else is chasing power. Norm is chasing the instruction manual, and then he gets it. He finds the access point, Barb's old computer, Vault-Tec's old nerve center, and when he opens it, he finds the kind of word you don't casually throw into a story unless you're ready to change the entire universe. Forced evolutionary virus. That acronym is not just lore. That acronym is Fallout's version of the devil's name, because once the F.E.V. enters the room, everything becomes possible. Mutations, experiments, humanity rewritten at the genetic level. The show is basically telling us, you thought Vault-Tec's experiments were psychological. No? They were biological. And here's the important part. Norm doesn't get time to process it. He doesn't get to run. He doesn't even get to fully understand what he's seeing. Because the second he touches the file, Ronnie appears, and Ronnie doesn't argue. Ronnie doesn't negotiate. Ronnie doesn't say, "What are you doing here?" Ronnie attacks him like he's trained for this exact moment. He goes for his throat, and he uses the power cord like it's not an improvised weapon, like it's standard procedure, like he's done it before, and the show cuts away with Norm down. ambiguous, unclear. That's where episode 5 ends it, and that ambiguity is what the internet is screaming about, because Fallout loves doing this. Fallout loves making you think you're watching a simple survival story, and then revealing it's actually a story about institutions, about systems, about corporations that outlive nations, about experiments that outlive the people running them. So when Norm goes down the second he sees F.E.V., the question becomes, was that an assassination or was that a containment protocol? And that brings us to the 4 biggest theories for what happened to him. Theory number 1, Norm is alive, and now he's a prisoner. This is the most straightforward possibility, the one that feels the most TV. Norm gets knocked out. Norm gets dragged away. Norm wakes up later in restraints. And at first glance, this feels like the safest outcome because he's alive. But in Fallout, alive doesn't always mean safe. Alive sometimes means still useful. If Ronnie wanted Norm dead, he could have made it final. If Vault-Tec's people wanted a clean removal, they wouldn't leave it ambiguous. They would show the end. So the show choosing to cut away, to leave us in this gray zone, suggests that Norm's body still matters, that Norm is still an asset, and it makes sense because Norm has something the Vault system values more than loyalty. He has access. He's inside the inner circle. He's one of the few people who can move through Vault-Tec spaces without triggering immediate suspicion. Norm isn't just a witness. He's a key. So if he's taken prisoner, it means Vault-Tec isn't just panicking. They're thinking. And if they're thinking, they're planning. Now, picture the scene. Norm wakes up. It's not a dungeon. It's not a wasteland cage. It's sterile, bright, corporate. A room that looks like it was designed by someone who thinks fear is unprofessional. And standing over him isn't a raider. It's someone with a clipboard, a binder, a smile. That smile says, "We're not going to kill you, Norm." That is Vault-Tec. That is the horror. Not brutality, but bureaucracy. Prison as a policy. And this theory is powerful because it keeps Norm in play. It sets up episode 6 as a reveal episode. Who does Ronnie answer to? What is his real role? Was he always a plant? Was he always security? Was he always the person designed to hit the emergency stop button? And that's what this theory is really saying. Norm wasn't beaten. He was shut down, like a glitch, like a bug in the simulation. But theory number 1 is just the beginning, because Fallout doesn't always stop at captured. Fallout escalates, which takes us to theory number 2, the one that makes fans feel sick just saying it out loud. Norm becomes the first Phase 2 test subject. This is the nightmare scenario, and it starts with a simple logic. Why introduce F.E.V. now? Why drop that acronym in episode 5, unless the show is about to use it? F.E.V. isn't a casual reference. It's not a fun Easter egg. It's not a wink to gamers. It's an engine, a story detonator. Once you reveal F.E.V. exists in your story, you're telling the audience mutations are coming, experiments are coming, something inhuman is coming, and Norm finding it first is the worst thing that could happen to Norm, because in a normal story, the person who discovers the secret becomes the whistleblower. In Fallout, the person who discovers the secret becomes the sample. Norm is the perfect candidate for a Phase 2 test. Why? Because he's not a random wastelander. He's not someone Vault-Tec can dismiss as contaminated. He's pure, controlled, vault raised, a clean baseline. And that's what corporations love, clean data. If Vault-Tec wants to test F.E.V., they don't want a raider. They don't want an NCR soldier. They want someone who grew up inside a controlled environment, someone whose entire life is documented, someone whose genetics and upbringing are basically a spreadsheet. That's Norm. This is the kind of horror Fallout is built for, because the wasteland is scary, but the idea of being turned into something against your will, that's the real terror. And the reason this theory hits so hard is because it weaponizes everything Norm is. Norm is the brain. Norm is the observer. Norm is the witness. Turning that person into a monster, that would be the cruelest irony. A man who only wanted truth turned into proof. And if episode 6 reveals even a hint of this, even a single shot of a medical facility, even one line that suggests Norm has been moved to a secure area, This theory becomes not just possible, it becomes the story. But let's pump the brakes for 1 second, because that theory is horrifying, and Fallout is horrifying, but it's also smart, and smart stories don't always go for the loudest shock. Sometimes they go for something colder, something cleaner. Which brings us to theory number 3. Norm dies, but his discovery survives. This is the conspiracy thriller outcome, the one that hurts but keeps the plot moving. In this theory, Norm's physical survival isn't the point. The point is the information, because episode 5 is structured like a trap snapping shut. Norm gets closer and closer to the truth. The tension rises, and then the moment he touches it, the system reacts. That's how you write a story where the villain is not a person, the villain is a machine. So in theory 3, Vault-Tec executes him quietly. No drama, no spectacle, just elimination. But the show still has to respect what Norm discovered. It can't erase that. It can't undo the F.E.V. reveal. So even if Norm dies, his discovery becomes a ghost, a virus of its own. It escapes through other people, through Claudia, through logs, through data that someone else copies, through the simple fact that Norm caused chaos by touching the file. This theory fits Fallout's fatalism, because Fallout isn't always kind to people who tell the truth. Sometimes the truth gets them killed, but then the truth leaks anyway, because information in Fallout is like radiation. Once released, it spreads. And if Norm dies here, the story becomes about consequences. It becomes about the people left behind. It becomes about whether anyone else is brave enough to pick up the thread. But here's the thing, I don't think this is what the show is going to do. Not yet, because if they wanted the emotional punch of killing Norm, they would show it. They'd make you feel it. They'd let the moment land. Instead, they cut away. They keep it foggy. They keep it uncertain. That's not death. That's hold your breath. And that leads into theory number 4, the one that's the least flashy, but might be the most realistic. Norm gets rescued immediately, but at a cost. This is the survives but loses scenario, where Norm is saved, but the system still wins. Maybe Claudia finds him. Maybe someone else interrupts Ronnie. Maybe the fight gets broken up before it's final. Norm wakes up, alive, breathing, but now he's trapped in a new kind of prison, because even if he survives, he's compromised. He's labeled as unstable, a liar, a traitor, a threat, and that's how Vault-Tec punishes you without killing you. They don't execute you, they isolate you, they make sure nobody believes you, they make you radioactive socially. So now Norm has the truth, but he can't use it, because if he says F.E.V. out loud, people will look at him like he's crazy, or worse, they'll look at him like he's dangerous. And this theory is interesting because it's not about violence, it's about control. It's about how systems destroy people without spilling blood. And that's Vault-Tec's signature. So those are the 4 paths. Prisoner, test subject, dead but discovery survives, rescued but controlled. Now we have to do the real Fallout thing and look at what the story is telling us, because the most important clue isn't Ronnie's attack, it's the timing. Norm gets attacked the second he sees F.E.V., not after he runs, not after he tells someone, not after he makes a speech. The instant he touches the file, that means someone is monitoring access. Someone knows what that terminal holds. Someone knows what Norm is looking at. And that means Vault-Tec's system isn't dead. It's still awake. And if it's still awake, then Theory 1 and Theory 2 become the strongest, because Theory 3 and 4 are more emotional, but Theory 1 and 2 are more corporate. And Vault-Tec is corporate evil, not Raider evil. Corporate evil doesn't panic. Corporate evil doesn't scream. Corporate evil says, contain the breach, neutralize the asset, preserve the project. So let's connect the dots. Norm has spent the whole season doing one thing, pulling at the seam of Vault 31, 32, and 33. He's been chasing what those vaults are as a system. He's been trying to understand why it feels like people's lives are engineered, why choices feel pre-approved, why the entire community feels like it's living inside a script. Episode 5 finally rewards him. He finds the proof that Vault-Tec didn't just run social experiments. They ran biological ones. F.E.V. being present implies the experiment is not just how people behave, it's what people become. And once you look at it like that, Norm's cliffhanger becomes clearer. Norm isn't just being silenced, he's being redirected. Because if Vault-Tec is still functioning, then Norm finding F.E.V. could actually be the point. Norm might not be a mistake. Norm might be an intended variable. And that is where the story gets terrifying. Because what if the experiment always needed someone like Norm? Someone who would question things, someone who would push too far. So the system could see what happens when you introduce dissent. What happens when a controlled population produces a truth seeker? Do they eliminate him? Do they convert him? Do they recruit him? Or do they use him? That's how Vault-Tec thinks. Not like villains, like researchers. And if that's true, then Norm's fate isn't random. It's a test outcome. So now we take the 4 theories and we measure them against Fallout's biggest pattern. Fallout always punishes curiosity, but it also always rewards it with escalation. Curiosity gets you hurt, but curiosity also moves you into the next layer of the world. That's what it means to level up in Fallout. You don't get safer, you get deeper. So what does deeper look like here? If Norm is captured, deeper means Vault-Tec's internal power structure. Deeper means learning who Ronnie is. Deeper means learning what Barb's office really contained. Deeper means meeting the people still running the machine. If Norm becomes a test subject, deeper means the biological layer of the experiment. Deeper means F.E.V. facilities. Deeper means the show's first true mutation arc. Deeper means the horror of being redesigned. If Norm dies but the Discovery survives, deeper means someone else picking up the file. Deeper means Lucy or Cooper learning the truth. Deeper means the information becoming a warhead. If Norm is rescued but controlled. Deeper means internal civil war, paranoia, social sabotage, truth without proof. Now ask yourself, which one is the most Fallout? Which one feels like the show is building towards something huge? It's the one that does 2 things, keeps Norm alive, and uses the F.E.V. Because virus is not a detail you introduce just to shelve it. You introduce it because you're about to fire it. So here's how I think episode 6 and beyond is gonna play out. And this is where we lean into our final theory. I think Norm is alive, not because Vault-Tec is merciful, but because Vault-Tec is practical. Norm's death is messy. Norm's death creates questions. Norm's disappearance creates suspicion. But Norm alive, restrained, documented, processed, that's clean, that's controllable, that's useful. So the final lean is a fusion of theory 1 and theory 2. Norm is alive and captured because he is about to become a phase 2 asset. Not necessarily a full transformation immediately, not necessarily a super mutant overnight, but a pipeline, a process, a relocation, a medical evaluation, a quiet escalation, because that's how Vault-Tec operates. Step by step, form by form, experiment by experiment. So the real ending isn't Norm dies. The real ending is Norm becomes property. And that's why this cliffhanger is so brutal, because Lucy is fighting to survive the wasteland. Cooper is fighting his own history. But Norm is fighting the corporate afterlife of Vault-Tec, a system that still thinks humans are resources, a system that still thinks the world is a laboratory. And the last thing Norm sees is the proof that the experiment never stopped. It just changed shape. And now the season's biggest question isn't even who dropped the bombs. It's this: what is Vault-Tec building out of the survivors? Because if the virus is back on the table, then the future of Fallout isn't just war. It's evolution, it's mutation, it's manufactured humanity, and Norm might be the first person we watch get pushed across that line. So here's the final shot I want you to picture. It's episode 6. Norm wakes up, his eyes flutter open, he's not in a jail cell, he's in a clean room, lights overhead, a glass wall. He tries to move and realizes he can't. He hears footsteps. Ronnie steps into view, and instead of looking angry, she looks calm, professional, like she just completed a task, and she says something like, "Norm MacLean, subject retrieved." And that's when you realize this wasn't a fight, this was a protocol, and Norm was never supposed to walk away from Barb's terminal, because the moment he saw F.E.V., Norm stopped being a person. He became a file. And the scariest part, Vault-Tec doesn't even think that's evil. Vault-Tec thinks that's efficient. So if you're asking what happened to Norm, here's the honest answer. Norm survived the wasteland long enough to find the truth. And the truth grabbed him back. Because in Fallout, the outside world kills you fast, but the inside world keeps you alive, so it can use you. And the final question, the one we should all be asking going into episode 6, is not whether Norm is dead. It's whether Norm will still be Norm when we see him again.